Okay, so this is the instruction video for the hot pad. You should start out with two 9-inch pieces. I have my 2 pieces right here. The first thing you're going to do, what it says to step 2, is put the pieces right sides together, which is our pretty sides. So your fabric has a right side, or the pretty side, and a wrong side, which is the ugly side. So we're gonna flip these around so that my pretty sides are touching. That is what they need to do. They need to be facing each other. Then it says, on one side, mark 2 lines 4 inches apart. So I'm gonna just, on one side, I'm just gonna draw a line down here. Then what I'm gonna do is I'm going to line that mark up with the 4, and I'm going to draw over here at the 1. So now I have 2 lines that are 4 inches apart. I just used this ruler at the bottom of the sewing machine to make sure that they were 4 inches, or you could use a seam gauge. So once I have those 2 lines drawn, that is the hole that I'm gonna leave open. I am now going to pin all around the 3 edges, well, technically 3.5, that I'm going to be sewing. When you pin, you go down through both layers of the fabric, and I just kind of wiggle until I can feel the table, and then I pull up through both layers of the fabric. That is a proper pinning. If you're just going through the 2 layers like this and not coming back up, that's what's called stabbing, and that can actually stab you because when you grip your fabric, you're gonna grab those sharp edges. So do not stab, but we need to pin. So I'm gonna go down and up. And I just do that so that the points are facing the middle of the fabric. So I pin down and up, just 3 or 4 on each side. The purpose of pinning is to make sure that the fabric doesn't move as we are stitching. As it's going through the machine, we want to make sure our edges are staying together and they're not shifting. So we pin to keep those in place. So I'm almost done. I'm going to just pin this last side. Okay, making sure I go down and up. Now, as we sew, we do not sew over the pins. So as we're coming up, and now my other line is right here, so I'm not gonna go in between those 2 lines. So I'm just gonna pin right there. So I left this part open, this 4 inches. As I was saying, you don't sew over pins because that can snap your needle if the needle hits the pin. So you take it out as you go. So my next step, step 3, is to sew a 5/8 seam allowance all the way around, keeping that gap in between the 4 inches open. We're not sewing that. So what I'll do is with my machine, on my stitch plate, the 5/8 line is this little line that has the dot on it. So the edge of my fabric is gonna be lined up with that 5/8 line. So I'm gonna start on one of my lines. Now I'm lining up my edge of my fabric right here with the 5/8 line. And remember, when we start any seam, we go forward 5 stitches and then back 5 stitches. I did a little bit more, I did 6, that's okay. Now I'm gonna go forward until I'm about 5/8 of an inch from this edge. So I just sew forward. Now I'm coming to a pin, I stop and pull it out, keep going forward. Okay, that looks about right. Now when we pivot, needle is down, presser foot up, rotate, presser foot down. Now I'm not quite on the 5/8, so I'm just gonna move my fabric as I sew. And remember, I just gently move it. I don't have to use a lot of force, but I'm moving it until I see that dot back over here so that I'm back on my 5/8 line. Take out my pins as I go. Now I'm back on that 5/8 line, so now I just keep it. Once again, just removing my pins as I go. Stop and remove them. Don't remove them while you are sewing. So I just keep sewing until I get to this next corner. And then needle down, presser foot up, rotate. Oh, I actually did a really good job. I'm on my 5/8 line. Presser foot back down and keep going. So I keep going, keeping this edge. This is where I'm looking, the edge of my fabric. is on. I'm going a little fast. You should never go that fast in class, but I have a lot more experience. Taking out my pins as I go. Okay, needle down, presser foot up, rotate, presser foot down. I'm a little too far, so I'm just gonna swerve it back to my 5/8. There we go. Take out my pins as I go. Keeping it on my 5/8 line. This is my last corner. I come up to it, needle down, presser foot up, rotate, presser foot down. Keep sewing. Now I'm coming up to that line and I'm gonna stop and back stitch when I get to that line. Okay, stop, back stitch. Okay. Now I can take it out, and if you'll notice, I'll come back over here. If you'll notice, I left that 4-inch gap open. I did not sew through that 4-inch gap, and I back stitched on the edges of that 4-inch gap. Now, I can cut my threads, and my next step, which it says on my guide sheet, which is my instruction sheet, my next step is to trim my corners. And I'm getting all of this extra fabric in the corners, and I'm gonna cut that out. The reason I do that is because when I flip it right side out, I don't want there to be a lot of bulk in those corners. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut just diagonally across the corners, but not in the seams. I do not cut through the seams. That is very important. So if you'll notice, I am really close, but I'm not through the seam. And I'm gonna do that with all 4 sides. Just getting rid of some of that extra fabric on the edges. Don't cut my paper. Okay, trimming and trimming. So once again, I get close to, but not through the corners. Now, my next step in step 5, so I turn it right side out. So now I use that opening that I left. I turn it right side out. Just gonna give it a little shake to kind of get the fabric to move. Now I have these really cool things called point turners. They are these little white pieces. This part can be pretty sharp, but I'm going to gently push out my corners so that they're nice and squared corners. I don't want rounded corners. I made a square object. I don't want it to look circular. So I use this to just gently, don't push too hard or you're gonna push through the seam and you'll create a hole in your fabric. I just gently push that out, all 4 corners. And my last one. Okay. Now, if you'll look, I have my square shape. So now what I do is I take my 3 layers of batting. 2 of these layers have a special material in it that helps reflect the heat, which helps prevent it from going through the hot pad. So I'm going to put the Insul-Bright, which is that special fabric, then I'm gonna put a layer of this cotton batting, and that just helps insulate it even more. And then I'm gonna put another layer of the Insul-Bright. So there are 3 layers of this fabric that's going into the hot pad. So I'm just gonna kind of fold it. I'm gonna find my opening and I'm gonna stick it in. This part might take a little while because you have to adjust it. And we want these layers to open back up inside the hot pad. So now I'm gonna open it up now that I've got it in there. Once again, this might take a while because you have to get everything nice and flat. So I'm gonna get these into this corner and get those 3 layers. Just be patient with yourself. It's okay if it takes a while. Okay, so I've got it almost in. I just wanted to show you, when we get it in, we wanna make sure that it's nice and flat. I can still feel a bump right here, so I'm just going to stick my hand in and try to smooth it out towards the edges. Okay, so now that's pretty good. Oh, I got another crease right here. So I'm just gonna reach my hand in gently and push the extra fabric towards that corner. Same thing over here, push it towards that corner. And then I'll have it all the way around nice and flat. Now I do have this opening right here, and my next step is to sew that closed. So what I'm gonna do is take a couple pins, and I want to make sure that I sew. I'm gonna pin this closed so that go down and up so that my edges stay closed while I'm sewing. Just a couple pins. Okay, now my final step is to do what's called top stitching. There we go. I'm gonna do top stitching around the 4 corners, and as I do that, that closes this opening. So what I'll do is I'll start probably on this side. Now when you top stitch, you stitch 1/4 of an inch from the edge. So I'm gonna line up the edge of my fabric with this outside edge of the presser foot, okay? And I am sewing through quite a bit of layers, so go nice and slow. We don't need to rush it. But I'm gonna sew forward. Oh, I'm in back mode, that's fine. I'll go back and then forward, so I've back stitched that. Now nice and slow. If you go too fast on this part, you can sew off of the fold, which is what we don't want, or you can break your needle because going through this many layers of fabric can be really intense for the needle. So we're just gonna go nice and slow up to this corner. When I get to the corner, I'm going to pivot. I'm gonna go close to the corner, needle down, presser foot up, rotate, presser foot down. So you'll see that my edge of my fabric, once again, is lined up with this right edge of the presser foot. You might have to help push this through because there's so many layers. So as you can see with my left hand, my right hand's keeping it straight, but my left hand is kind of helping it move through. And that's totally fine if you have to do that. So I come up to my other corner, needle down, presser foot up, rotate. I'm a little wide, but I can just sew back and fix that. Okay, keeping it together all the way around. Come up to the corner, and you guessed it, I'm gonna pivot. Needle down, presser foot up, rotate, presser foot down. Now here's where I'm gonna sew these closed. So I just make sure that I take out my pins as I come to them. So I'm sewing, take out that first pin, keep going all the way down, keep going, and go all the way down to the corner, and then I just have a little bit more to where I started. So I just go needle down, presser foot up, rotate, presser foot down. Now I'm just gonna go overlap that and back stitch, and then I'm done. Overlap a few stitches, back stitch. Okay, take it out, cut my threads, and I have a hop pad.